The taxi smelled of jasmine air freshener and old leather, and the driver didn't speak, which was the precise mercy I needed. I watched Hong Kong slide past the window, the lit towers, the impossible density of lives stacked against each other in the dark, the harbor glimpsed in slivers between buildings like something the city was trying to keep secret. I had lived here for 3 years and I had seen almost none of it. That was the thing about being a housewife in a marriage like mine. The world contracted to the dimensions of a man's preferences. His neighborhood. His restaurants, selected by his PA. His dry cleaner, his florist, his particular route home from the office that I had memorized because I had once, in the first year, made the mistake of suggesting a different one. The city had been happening without me. All of it. The whole enormous, indifferent, beautiful machinery of it, running just outside the apartment window, and I had been inside folding laundry in the precise way he preferred. Seams aligned, nothing inside out, the shirts on the left side of the closet and the trousers on the right, while Hong Kong went on without me like a party I hadn't been invited to. Never again, I thought. The words arrived not as resolve but as fact, the way you state something that has already happened rather than something you intend. Vivian's building was in Sighing Pun, a neighborhood that smelled of char siu and possibility, where the streets were narrow enough that buildings reached toward each other overhead and the sky appeared in strips. I had always loved this part of the city. It felt like a place where a person could be anonymous in the good way, not invisible, not erased, but simply one more human being moving through the world at her own pace toward her own purposes. She was waiting at the door when I arrived. She didn't say anything. She took the single bag I had packed. I had not taken much. The expensive things, the wardrobe assembled in the image of Mrs. Daniel Ewan, had stayed, and she handed me a glass of wine and pointed at the couch and sat down across from me on the floor with her own glass, and we sat in silence for a while, which was the thing I had always loved most about Vivian. She understood that some moments needed to breathe before they could be spoken. "Did you cry?" she asked finally. "No." She nodded, unsurprised. "You will." "Not tonight." "But you will." "I know. The ugly kind. The kind where you can't breathe properly and your face does things." "I know, Viv. I'm just preparing you." She swirled her wine. "How did he seem?" I thought about it. The honest answer required a precision I was still assembling. "He seemed like a man who had made a decision and was executing it efficiently," I said. "Which is how he always seems. It's how he proposes a merger. How he orders dinner. How he ended our marriage." I paused. There was a moment, one moment, where something moved in his face. When I said, I stopped. "What did you say?" I told her. She stared at me for a long second. Then she burst out laughing. The full, unguarded laugh she kept for things that were genuinely unexpected, the one that arrived before she could decide whether it was appropriate. "You did not." "I did." "You told Daniel Ewan to see a urologist." I suggested he address certain deficiencies. "Mara." She was still laughing, pressing her hand over her mouth. "You've been married to this man for 3 years. Perfectly well behaved. Perfect wife. And on the way out the door, I had nothing left to lose." I looked at my wine. It's a remarkable feeling, actually, having nothing to lose. I don't recommend the path to get there, but the feeling itself, there's a freedom in it that I don't think I've ever had before. Vivian stopped laughing. She looked at me with the careful attention she reserved for things that mattered to her. "Are you okay?" The question, asked this way, not "are you fine?" not "will you be all right?" but the present tense, unqualified, specific inquiry, undid something in me that the whole evening had not managed to touch. "I don't know yet," I said. "I think I will be. I think I'm going to be better than okay." I felt it as I said it, not as performance, not as the self-reassurance of someone who needs to believe something in order to function, but as a genuine reading of the situation. A diagnosis. I think I've been, I searched for the word, accumulating, for 3 years. Everything I couldn't do, couldn't say, couldn't be. Everything I put on a shelf because the shelf was inside a marriage, and the marriage had rules about what took up space. I looked at my hands. Tonight I walked out of there and the shelves came with me. Everything I put away. It's still there. I'm still a designer. I still know how to do this. 3 years of making his coffee correctly doesn't erase 5 years of training and 6 years of practice. No, Vivian said quietly. It doesn't. I'm going to call Meridian tomorrow. She was still for a moment. Meridian Group? I know it's ambitious. Mara, you were shortlisted for the Woolmark at 26. I was 26 4 years ago. Talent doesn't expire. She said it with the force of someone correcting a factual error. And Meridian isn't looking for someone who's had an easy path. They're looking for someone who has a vision. You have a vision. You've always had a vision. Daniel Ewan interrupting it for 3 years doesn't change what it is. I looked at her, this woman who had been my truest witness, who had watched me disappear into a marriage and had kept, in my absence, a careful record of who I had been, holding it ready for the moment I came back to claim it. I don't know if they'll have me, I said. It's been years. Send the portfolio tonight, she said. Don't sleep on it. Don't let yourself overthink it into a drawer. She reached across the floor and touched my hand. You walked out of that apartment and left the candles burning. That's not a woman who overthinks things. That's a woman who has decided. I looked at the wine in my glass, turning it gently in the light. Outside, Hong Kong hummed and pulsed and carried its millions through the night without waiting, without slowing, without asking anyone's permission. It was, I understood, always going to be there. It had been there the whole time. I had simply been too occupied, too carefully, invisibly occupied, to walk out and meet it. I set down my glass. I opened my laptop. I sent the portfolio at 11:47, with a cover note that was 3 sentences long because everything important I had to say was already inside the work itself. Then I lay on Vivian's fold-out couch, with the metal bar running directly through its center and the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a country I had never visited, and I thought, I will go there. Wherever it was, whatever it looked like, I would go. I did not sleep until almost 4 in the morning. But when I finally did, I slept without dreaming, deeply and completely, the way a person sleeps when they have, after a very long time, put down something heavier than they realized they were carrying. My name was Mara Lim. In 11 hours, Meridian Group would call. I was ready. The office they had given me was small by the standards of what I had left behind. The apartment in mid-levels had been Daniel's, his architect, his furniture, his particular aesthetic of cold minimalism that expressed, I had always felt, less a design philosophy than a terror of anything soft enough to leave an impression. The office at Meridian was perhaps a third of its size, with a window that looked not at the harbor but at the side of the building opposite, close enough that I could see the reflections of clouds moving across its glass face. I loved it immediately and completely. There was a drafting table, slightly scarred along one edge where some previous occupant had been careless or passionate or both. There was a pinboard that someone had cleared for me, pale cork, waiting. There was a chair that had been adjusted for someone taller and which I spent the first 10 minutes recalibrating. Height, tilt, the lumbar support positioned for a spine that was mine and no one else's. These were small acts. They were enormous acts. The difference between adjusting a chair for yourself and adjusting your entire life to fit around someone else's comfort is not one of scale but of direction, and I understood, sitting in that chair at the correct height for my own body for the first time in 3 years, that direction was everything. I put my pencil case on the desk. My grandmother's brass letter opener, which I had carried from apartment to apartment since I was 22 and which had lived in a drawer at mid-level since my wedding day because Daniel found it aesthetically inconsistent with the decor. A photograph of Vivian and me at a night market in Taipei, taken 6 years ago, both of us mid-laugh over something I could no longer remember, our faces bright with the specific carelessness of people who have not yet been asked to be careful. I pinned the photograph to the board. Then I sat back and looked at the room and felt, in a way that arrived quietly and without fanfare, that I was home. The design team came to me in the afternoon, after the morning's disruption had settled into something the office could metabolize, because offices are ecosystems, and disruption moves through them the way weather moves through a valley, creating pressure systems and microclimates that everyone pretends not to notice while navigating entirely by feel. They came in ones and twos, these people I would be leading, ostensibly to discuss the autumn launch brief, practically to take my measure. I recognized the ritual. I had performed it myself in studios before my marriage, the careful triangulation of a new arrival. Who is she? What does she want? Will she make my life harder or easier? Is she the kind of person who takes credit or gives it? I answer their questions about the brief with specificity and genuine interest, because the brief was genuinely interesting. A collection positioned at the intersection of heritage craft and contemporary structure, which was a problem I had been thinking about, in various forms, for 3 years of invisible mental work. There is a particular shock on a designer's face when they realize that the person they've come to assess has already been thinking harder about their problem than they have. I watched it move through the room, a recalibration, a settling. By 4 o'clock, the room had changed its mind about me. I noticed one exception. She sat at the far end of the studio, at a desk positioned with the specific intentionality of someone who has chosen their location to see everything while appearing to focus on nothing. She was perhaps 30, with the groomed precision of someone who understood that appearance was a form of argument. She smiled at me 3 times during the afternoon, and each smile arrived a half-second before her eyes registered that she was smiling. The tell of a performance, the slight delay between decision and execution. Her name, I would learn from Lily before the day ended, was Claire Fong. She had been, until my arrival, the most senior designer in the department. She had, Lily told me in the conspiratorial whisper of someone who has been waiting for permission to share information, applied for the director position herself. She's been here 6 years, Lily said, with the careful neutrality of someone presenting facts and allowing me to construct the implications. She knows everyone. The clients, the suppliers, a fractional pause, the people upstairs. The people upstairs. The corporate architecture above Meridian Group. Yuan Holdings. I looked at Claire Fong across the studio, at the precise angle of her posture and the specific quality of her smile, and I understood that this was going to be complicated in ways that had nothing to do with design. Thank you, Lily, I said. Of course, Director Lim. She said my title with a small, private satisfaction, as though she had been waiting for someone to fill it correctly, and was pleased that the waiting was over. Daniel appeared at my office door at 5:15. The floor was largely empty by then. Meridian ran on the compressed efficiency of people who billed by the hour and lived by the principle that presence without productivity was a form of theater. A few colleagues remained at their desks, heads down, the concentrated silence of deep work. He knocked on the open door. I did not look up from the brief. The autumn timeline, he said. I need your projection by Friday. You'll have it Thursday, I said, still not looking up. A pause. I said Friday. And I said Thursday. I made a note in the margin. The client presentation is the following Monday. You'll want time to review. Thursday makes more sense. Another pause. Longer, with a different quality. The pause of a man recalculating. I looked up then. He was standing in the doorway with the expression of someone who has fired a weapon and is processing that it did not discharge in the expected direction. His suit was the charcoal brioni I had sent to the dry cleaner 14 times. I knew its particular cut, the way you know things you never intended to memorize, involuntarily, the way the body records the textures of its captivity. You are an employee of this company, he said. His voice was even. I am the principal shareholder of the parent company. The hierarchy. The hierarchy, I said, with a pleasantness I had been perfecting since the night I left the candles burning, places me as design director of Meridian Group, reporting to the creative board, with contractual autonomy over project timelines within reason. Thursday is within reason. Would you like me to forward the relevant clause? His jaw tightened. It was the same tightening I had seen that morning in the hallway, the same muscular response to information that refused to arrange itself according to his preferences. I had seen it dozens of times across 3 years and had always, until now, responded to it by making myself smaller, adjusting, finding a way to smooth the friction I had inadvertently created. I returned to the brief. Was there anything else? I asked. The silence from the doorway lasted 7 seconds. I counted them, not anxiously but with the steady attention of someone gathering data. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," I confirmed. I heard him leave. I heard the particular weight and rhythm of his footsteps down the corridor, the slightly altered cadence of a man leaving a room in which something has not gone as planned. I set down my pencil. My hands, I noticed, were completely steady. I looked at the photograph on the pinboard, Vivian and me, mid-laugh in Taipei 6 years ago, and I thought about the 23-year-old in that photograph, who had been afraid of nothing because she had not yet been taught to be afraid, and I thought about the 29-year-old sitting at this desk, who had been taught and had unlearned it, and I thought that perhaps unlearning was harder than learning and also more durable. What you learn, you can forget. What you unlearn, you carry differently. Not as knowledge but as the shape of a choice made under pressure, again and again, until it becomes simply the shape of you. I picked up the pencil. I worked until 7. When I left the building, stepping out through the glass doors into the central evening, the harbor ahead, the city behind, the specific quality of air that belongs to a place where land meets water and the world is always slightly in motion, I did not look back. I was learning that this was the whole of it. Not arriving. Not being arrived. Just moving steadily in the direction of the person you are becoming. And refusing, with every step, to apologize for the space you take up. On the way, I walked for 40 minutes before I took a taxi. This was not practical. My heels were wrong for walking, and the October air had turned cold in the specific way of Hong Kong evenings that begin warm and end otherwise, and I had left my jacket in the private room at the club in Tsim Sha Tsui because I had not, when I left, been thinking about jackets. But I needed the 40 minutes. I needed the pavement under my feet and the city moving around me and the physical fact of my own body carrying itself forward. Proof, sensory and immediate, that I was intact. That I had not, once again, been made smaller by the evening. The thing about what had happened with Lynn, the thing that no one who heard the story secondhand would fully understand, was not the danger of it. I had assessed the danger and responded to it, and the response had been, by any reasonable measure, effective. The thing was the exhaustion of it. The bone-deep weariness of being a woman who has to bring, to every professional encounter, the additional preparation of anticipating which men in the room have decided that her presence is an invitation. I had spent 3 years invisible. I had assumed, in some unexamined corner of myself, that invisibility was the dangerous condition. That being seen was the solution. What I was discovering, walking through Tsim Sha Tsui with my heels on the wrong pavement in the wrong weather, was that being seen introduced its own categories of danger. That the world did not, simply because you had decided to take up space in it again, immediately reorganize itself into a place that welcomed the taking of space. It pushed back. It tested. It sent you into rooms with men like Lynn to see what you were made of. I knew what I was made of. I had always known. 3 years of domestic erasure had not changed the composition of me, only temporarily obscured it, the way fog obscures a coastline without altering its geology. I flagged a taxi at the corner of Canton Road. Got in. Gave Vivian's address. The driver had the radio on low, a cantopop ballad, plaintive and melodic, the singer performing the mathematics of romantic loss with the commitment of someone who has been asked to make grief beautiful and has decided to give the assignment everything. I watched the harbor through the window. I thought about Daniel's face in that room. The specific moment of his no. I had spent 3 years cataloging his silences. I had not, until tonight, heard him use a single word to close a door for me. It was a small thing. I told myself it was a small thing. The part of me that had spent 3 years waiting to be seen knew it was not a small thing at all. Vivian was awake when I arrived. She was always awake. She ran on a schedule that bore no relationship to conventional circadian logic, sleeping in short intervals scattered across the day and spending the deep hours of the night at her kitchen table with architectural plans spread across every surface, her reading glasses pushed up onto her head, surrounded by coffee cups in various stages of completion. She looked up when I came in and performed the rapid survey that close friends conduct with the efficiency of people who have been reading each other for years, checking, quickly and thoroughly, the condition of what has come through the door. "You're walking," she said. "I walked for a while, yes." Different walk than when you left. She took off her glasses. What happened? I sat down at the kitchen table, pushing a roll of blueprints aside, and told her. All of it. The meeting, Lynn, the wine bottle, the particular moment when Daniel had stood in the rubble of it and said no to a man who had expected compliance, and then stood beside me on the curb in the dark and asked 3 words in a voice I had never heard from him before. Vivian listened with the stillness she reserved for things that required her full attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, turning her reading glasses over in her hands. He asked if you were okay, she said. He would have done it for anyone. That's what you told him. That's what I believe. She looked at me with the particular expression she reserved for moments when she believed I was lying to myself and had decided to let me arrive at the truth at my own pace rather than hauling me there by the collar. It was an expression I had known since we were 22, and it had not, in 7 years, changed in any particular. Mara, she said carefully, you can believe that and also believe that something is beginning. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Nothing is beginning. Okay. I mean it, Viv. Whatever this is, it comes too late and it costs too much. 3 years. I gave that marriage 3 years of my best attention, and he looked through me for every single day of them. You don't come back from that because a man says 1 word in a room and means it. No, she agreed. You don't. Not because of 1 word. She put her glasses down. But you also don't stop feeling things because the timing is inconvenient. And you've never once, in all the years I've known you, been able to lie convincingly about what you feel. Not to me. I looked at the blueprints on the table. An apartment building, perhaps. The floor plan repeated across multiple pages, each unit a contained world of parallel walls and designated purposes. He'll go back to Sylvie, I said. Maybe. She came back from Paris for him. She's been positioning herself since the moment she landed. There's a reason he asked for the divorce when he did. She returned and he looked at her and remembered the version of himself that loved her, and he chose that version over whatever we were. And now? I looked at the floor plan. All those parallel walls. All those rooms arranged for living in. Now nothing, I said. Now I do my job and I become who I was supposed to become, and I don't mistake 1 decent moment from a man for a transformation in his character. Vivian nodded slowly. She had the look of someone archiving information for later use, not disagreeing, simply storing. Can I ask you something? She said. When has that ever stopped you? When he said, "Are you okay?" She paused. How did it feel? The kitchen was quiet. The city outside moved in its nighttime register, lower and slower, the deep breath of a place taking a moment between its own exertions. I thought about standing on the curb. The harbor air. The specific quality of being looked at by someone who had, for 3 years, refined the art of looking past you, and finding in their eyes, for the first time, the thing you had waited for without allowing yourself to name it. Recognition. Not of what I had done tonight, or what I was professionally, or what I could offer Meridian Group by Thursday morning. Recognition of me. The specific, irreducible, inconvenient fact of my existence as a person in the world. Like being handed something in a language I've been told I no longer speak, I said. Vivian was quiet for a long time. Be careful, she said finally. Not as a warning. More like a gift. The precise, practical kind that people who love you offer when they can see further down the road than you currently can. I know, I said. And Mara? I looked at her. The wine bottle was inspired. I laughed. It came out of me suddenly and fully, the kind of laugh that clears something, and Vivian laughed too, and for a few minutes the kitchen was warm with it. 2 women at a table covered in blueprints, laughing at the exact hour when laughing was the most honest and necessary and human thing available to either of us. I stayed until almost 2. When I finally lay down on the fold-out couch, the metal bar in its customary position directly below my spine, I stared at the water stain on the ceiling, my country, my unvisited place, and I thought about what Vivian had said. You've never been able to lie convincingly about what you feel. The harbor breathed outside. Somewhere in mid-levels, on the 43rd floor, in the apartment where the candles had long since burned themselves out, Daniel Ewan was sleeping in the cold, minimalist dark. I did not know what he was dreaming. I knew, with the clarity of someone who has just been asked a simple question and given themselves permission, finally, to hear it, I knew what I felt. I did not sleep for a long time, but when I did, I dreamed of coastlines, fog-covered and geological, and entirely unchanged. Eleanor Ewan woke before dawn. I know this because I heard her, the particular soft percussion of an old woman who has developed, over decades of early mornings, the ability to move through a house without disturbing it. The quiet click of the kitchen cabinet. The low breath of the kettle beginning its work. The specific silence of someone sitting down at a table with the settled patience of a person who has been awake in the dark long enough to be comfortable there. I lay in the half-light of the bedroom and listened to her exist in the apartment and felt, unexpectedly and without permission, something that had no clean name, somewhere between grief and warmth, between the ache of something missed and the strange consolation of its unexpected presence. My own grandmother had woken before dawn. She had made tea the same way, by feel, in the dark, as though light were a luxury the morning hadn't yet earned. I had spent entire childhood summers in her kitchen in those pre-dawn hours, sitting on the counter while she moved around me with the unhurried certainty of a woman in complete possession of her own space. She had died when I was 11. The loss of her had been the first loss I could not rationalize away, the first grief that arrived in my body rather than in my understanding, and it had left in me a specific hollow that I had spent the subsequent 18 years learning to live around rather than fill. Eleanor Ewan was not my grandmother. She was the architect of a marriage that had cost me 3 years of my own becoming. She was imperious and calculating and entirely without apology for either quality. She had called me child and held my face in her hands, and the hollow had shifted. I got up. She didn't startle when I appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked up from her tea with the unsurprised expression of someone who had been expecting me and was merely waiting to see how long I'd take. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make you a cup." I sat. She made the tea with the efficient movements of someone for whom this was a private ritual now briefly shared, a distinction she seemed to understand without my having to articulate it. She set the cup in front of me and returned to her own seat, and for a while we simply sat in the pre-dawn kitchen with a harbor dark beyond the windows and the silence of the apartment around us, and neither of us spoke. It was the most comfortable I had been in that apartment in 3 years. "You're leaving him," she said finally. It was not a question. I looked at my tea. The question of how much she knew, whether Daniel had finally told her, whether she had found the documents, whether she had simply looked at the two of us moving through the apartment with a careful avoidance of people navigating a concluded thing, felt suddenly less important than the question of how to be honest with a woman who deserved it. "The papers are already filed," I said. "I'm sorry you weren't told sooner." She absorbed this without visible disturbance. She had the quality of certain old women who have lived long enough that news, even painful news, arrives into a context broad enough to hold it, who do not meet facts with shock because they have already imagined most of the possible shapes the world can take. "How long?" she asked. "We signed the night of our anniversary. 3 weeks ago." She was quiet. She turned her teacup slowly in its saucer, a small circular motion, once and then again. "He asked you, or you asked him?" "He asked me." A pause. "Because of the Chen girl?" "Partly." She made a sound, not quite contempt, not quite sorrow, something occupying the precise border between them. "That girl," she said, with a weight that suggested a longer history than I was aware of, "has been a problem since she was 17 years old and decided that my grandson's attention was something she owned by right." She set down her cup. "I had hoped," she stopped. "Revised. I had believed that 3 years would be sufficient for him to understand what he had in front of him." I looked at her. "You chose me deliberately." "I choose everything deliberately," she said, without apology. "I am 70 years old. I stopped doing things accidentally around the time you were born." She looked at me directly, with the undeflected gaze of someone who has decided that honesty is the only remaining luxury worth the expense. "I chose you because you were exceptional. Because you were the kind of woman who walks into a room, and the room quietly reorganizes itself without your having to ask. Because you had built something real with your own hands, and had the intelligence to know what it was worth. A pause. And because I believed, perhaps incorrectly, that my grandson had more sense than he has demonstrated. The harbor outside was beginning to lighten, the particular gradual revelation of a city emerging from dark, the water going from black to deep blue to the first tentative gray of early morning. You weren't wrong about him entirely, I said, and was surprised to find that I meant it. I stopped, finding the words with the care of someone working in unfamiliar material. He protected me. Last week, there was a situation with a client, and I looked at the water. He said no, when it would have been easier and more profitable to say yes. Eleanor was very still. Did he? She said. It was not a question either. It was the sound of a woman receiving information that confirmed something she had wagered heavily on and had not been entirely certain she would win. It doesn't change the divorce, I said quickly. I want to be clear about that. One decent act doesn't. I'm not asking it to change the divorce, she said. I'm not a romantic, Mara. I'm a strategist. What I'm hearing is that somewhere inside that spectacular idiot I raised is the man I always believed he could be. She paused. It's information. What you do with it is your business entirely. I looked at her, this woman who had arranged my marriage like a chess opening, who had arrived in this apartment with 3 weeks of luggage and the serene confidence of someone who has decided that proximity is the most effective instrument available to her, and who was now sitting across from me in the pre-dawn dark telling me, with the precision of a woman who has stopped wasting words, exactly what she saw. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you deserve to make decisions with accurate information, she said simply. You were given very little of that when you entered this marriage. I owe you at least this much. The kettle had gone cold. Neither of us moved to reheat it. He doesn't know how to need people, I said. He was never taught. Whatever happened to him, before the marriage, he learned to treat vulnerability as a liability, as something to be managed rather than felt. I paused. I spent 3 years trying to be someone he could need without it costing him anything, without requiring him to admit the needing. And I stopped. It hollowed me out. Eleanor nodded slowly. The movement contained, within its slowness, both acknowledgement and something that looked, from a certain angle, like guilt. His parents, she said after a moment. She stopped. Tried again. I was not as present as I should have been when he was young. His parents' marriage was, a pause, selecting the word, educational, in the way of things that teach children lessons they spend their adult lives unlearning. She looked at her hands, folded on the table. I believed that strength was what I was giving him. I see now that what I gave him was the architecture of distance. A house with very fine walls and no way in. The morning was arriving fully now. The harbor silver and wide beyond the windows, a ferry crossing from Kowloon, the city beginning its daily decision to exist. I thought about the night in the dark bedroom. His voice, fractionally changed, saying my name like he meant it. The advice about the suit, small, practical, quietly attentive in the way of someone who has been watching more carefully than they have let themselves acknowledge. Don't wear the gray suit. Such a small thing. Such an enormous thing. I'm not coming back to the marriage, I said. Not harshly. As a statement of geography, the simple location of where I was standing and my intention to remain there. I know, Eleanor said, but I searched for it. I'm not closed. To however things develop. From here, I looked at the harbor. I just need it to be real. Not a performance. Not a man deciding he wants me back because losing something clarified its value. Real. The kind of real that comes from doing the work of becoming someone who can actually be present for another person. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, the hand of a 70-year-old woman, mapped with its own history, warm and without apology, and she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We sat together in the morning kitchen while Hong Kong woke around us, and I thought about the hollow my grandmother had left, and the way certain people arrive in your life and sit in the dark with you before dawn and make tea by feel, and how the hollow does not fill. It never fills, but sometimes on certain mornings, in certain kitchens, it becomes a space you can bear. Even a space you are grateful for teaching you, finally, what you needed. He wept before I did. That was the thing I wasn't prepared for. Han, who had been the steady one, the older one, the one who had stood between me and every difficult thing our childhood produced with a particular solidity of a person who has decided that their function in the world is to absorb impact so that others don't have to. Han, who had never once in my memory cried in front of me. Not when our mother left. Not when our father's business collapsed and we moved 3 times in 2 years. Not when he boarded a train at Hung Hom Station with 1 bag and told me he would send money when he could and would be back before I knew it. He wept with his whole body. The way children weep, before they learn the adult discipline of containing grief within acceptable dimensions. The shaking, the complete surrender to it, the way it moved through him in waves that had been waiting, I understood, for 10 years to find a shore. I held him. That was all. I held my brother in a hospital room in Pak Phu Lam with the city spread below the window and the afternoon light going amber and long across the floor, and I did not say anything because there was nothing to say that the holding wasn't already saying, and we stayed like that for a long time while the sounds of the ward moved around us, the distant Pennsylvania system, the wheel of a medication cart, the ordinary machinery of a place dedicated to the project of keeping people alive, and I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as a door opening that I had forgotten was there. Not a metaphorical door. Something physical. Something that had been sealed, quietly and without my full awareness, on the day he didn't come back, and that had remained sealed through everything that followed. Through the years of waiting, through the marriage, through the slow erasure and the recovery. Sealed in the particular way of griefs that have no resolution and so cannot be fully processed, only carried. It opened. The pain of it was enormous and clean and entirely bearable, in the way that honest pain always is. The difference between a wound that has been properly treated and one that has been covered and left to work its damage in the dark. He was here. He had been here, in this city, this whole time. And now I had found him. The story came out in pieces over the following hours. He had come to Hong Kong 8 years ago, not the mainland city he'd initially gone to, following work. Following a contact who had offered construction management on a development in Kowloon. He had intended to find me. He had, in fact, tried. The phone number he had for me was 3 moves out of date. The address he had written down in the notebook he carried everywhere was an apartment I had vacated 2 years before he arrived. He had left messages with a mutual acquaintance from our childhood neighborhood who had, it emerged, moved to Canada without passing them on. Then the accident. A site incident, 2 years ago. A structural failure during a renovation on an older building in Sham Shui Po. He had been on the wrong floor at the wrong moment. The injuries had been severe enough to require extended hospitalization, during which the regression had begun. The mind retreating from what it couldn't metabolize, finding shelter in an earlier version of itself, a 6-year-old boy in our mother's kitchen, before everything became complicated. Before the leaving and the loss and the 10 years of failed attempts to find his way back to the sister he'd left at a train station with a promise he had tried, sincerely and repeatedly, to keep. The social workers had done what they could. Without family contacts, without anyone who knew his name, his history, the particular geography of who he was, they had managed him as best the system permitted, which was not well enough, which is never well enough, which is the specific failure of systems that encounter human beings reduced to their paperwork. His paperwork had been incomplete. His sister had been 3 kilometers away, folding laundry in the precise way her husband preferred. I sat with this for a long time. The weight of it. The specific, terrible coincidence of 2 people failing to find each other by margins so small they were almost worse than large ones. The phone number 3 digits wrong, the address 2 years stale, the mutual acquaintance 3 time zones gone. The architecture of missing someone by inches, repeated enough times to become a decade. I looked for you, he said. His voice, emerging from the regression that still moved in and out like weather, carried the quality of someone speaking from a great distance towards something very close. I kept looking. I know, I said. I know you did. I wrote letters. I didn't know where to send them, so I kept them. He reached under the thin hospital pillow, the gesture of a child with a hidden treasure, and produced a small notebook, soft-covered, its edges worn to a curve that spoke of years of handling. I wrote to you. Every time something happened that I wanted to tell you. I took the notebook. I did not open it. I held it in both hands the way you hold something that requires a different kind of attention than your hands are capable of. Something that needs the whole of you, more than the moment can contain. I'll read every word, I said. He looked at me with a searching clarity that moved through his eyes in intervals. The man he was breaking through the child the trauma had made him, irregular and unpredictable, like light through cloud cover. You're really here, he said. You're not. A pause. Sometimes I dream you, and when I wake up you're not there. I'm here, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Daniel found me in the corridor at 9 o'clock. I had stepped out to call Vivian, to arrange the practical matters. A better room, a specialist, the particular logistics of someone suddenly acquiring a family member who needs more than a public ward can provide. I was on the phone when I heard the elevator and looked up and found him walking toward me with his jacket gone, and his tie loosened in the way that meant he had been working late and had come directly, which meant someone had told him where I was, which meant Lily. Of course. Lily, who had appointed herself the quiet custodian of my well-being with a thoroughness that I had not fully appreciated until this moment. He stopped when he reached me. I held up one finger, wait, and finished the call with Vivian. Then I lowered the phone and looked at him in the corridor light, this man who had been arriving in my peripheral vision with increasing frequency lately, occupying the edges of moments he had no particular right to be in, and I was too tired to be guarded and too full of what had happened in that room to have the energy for anything other than the truth. My brother, I said. I found my brother. Something moved across his face, not the careful management of expression I had catalogued for 3 years, but something prior to management, something that arrived before the editing. Genuine feeling, moving through him visibly, the way weather moves through glass. Is he all right? He asked. He will be. I looked at the corridor floor. The particular institutional linoleum of hospitals, designed for practicality and indifferent to everything else. He's been here for 2 years. In this hospital, or near it. For 2 years while I stopped. While I was in the apartment. While I was folding laundry. While I was performing the perfect invisible wife 3 kilometers for my own brother, lost in a regression in a public ward because there was no one to claim him. The sentence had no good ending. Mara. My name. The way he'd said it that night in the dark bedroom. Like he meant it. Like it was the name of a specific person he was specifically addressing. I looked up. This is not your fault, he said. He said it with a directness that precluded the possibility of argument. Not consolation. Not the soft cushioning of difficult truth. But the hard, flat certainty of a statement he believed entirely. What happened to him happened because of an accident and a system and 10 years of near misses that had nothing to do with you. You were 3 kilometers away and you didn't know. That is a tragedy. It is not a culpability. I looked at him. This man. This infuriating, complicated, too late arriving man. Standing in a hospital corridor at 9 o'clock at night, having come directly from his office to a place where I was. Standing here and saying the precise thing, in the precise register, that I needed to hear. Not the soft thing. Not the easy comfort. The true thing. How do you know what I need to hear? I asked. The question came out quieter than I intended. Less accusation, more genuine wondering. He was quiet for a moment. The corridor hummed around us, indifferent and fluorescent. I've been paying attention, he said. I know it's late. I know it doesn't. He stopped. Revised. I know what it costs, and I know it doesn't balance. But I've been paying attention, Mara, for whatever it's worth. I looked at him for a long time. The notebook was still in my hands. Han's letters, 10 years of them, written to a sister he couldn't find but refused to stop addressing. 10 years of I wanted to tell you this. I wanted you to know. The things we cannot unsay are not always the wrong things. Sometimes they are the things we should have said sooner. Sometimes they arrive exactly when they can be received. Not when they should have been sent, but when the person waiting for them has become, Through everything that intervened, someone capable of holding them. "Go home, Daniel," I said. Gently. The gentlest I had been with him in months. He nodded. He turned to go. "Thank you," I said, "for coming." He paused without turning back. "I'll always come," he said. Then he walked to the elevator, and the doors opened, and he was gone. I stood in the corridor for a long time afterward, holding my brother's notebook, listening to the hospital breathe around me. I did not know yet what to do with what he'd said. But I held it carefully. The way you hold something you are not ready to open, but are no longer willing to put down. We stayed at the railing for a long time. This is the part that surprised me most. Not the conversation, not the things said and the things withheld, not even the quality of his attention, which had shifted in the months since the anniversary into something I still didn't have a clean word for. What surprised me was the silence afterward. The way we stood together in it without either of us reaching for words to fill it, without the anxious social machinery that normally rushes into the space between two people who have said something true and are waiting to see what it costs. We had always been bad at silence between us. His silences, in the marriage, had been a form of weather, something I learned to read and navigate and accommodate, adjusting the temperature of my own behavior in response to the pressure systems of his mood. My silences had been smaller. Careful. The silences of someone who has learned that speaking takes up space, and space has been designated for someone else. This silence was different. It was the silence of two people who have, after a very long time, arrived at the same place from different directions and are simply standing in it, taking their bearings, not yet sure what comes next but no longer afraid of the uncertainty itself. A cormorant landed on the railing 20 meters down the promenade, folded its wings with the brisk efficiency of something that has completed a task, and regarded the harbor with the unimpressed authority of a creature that has been doing this since before the city existed and expects to be doing it long after. I watched it and thought about longevity, about what persists. "Han asked about you," I said, eventually. Daniel turned slightly. Not toward me entirely. A fractional movement, the adjustment of someone who is listening with more than their ears. "What did he ask?" "Whether you were good to me." I paused. He asked it from the 6-year-old place. Very directly. No diplomacy. The way children ask things before they learn that some questions are supposed to be indirect. "What did you tell him?" I looked at the water. The ferry had completed its crossing and was loading again at the Kowloon Pier, a small white shape at this distance, surrounded by the suggestion of movement, the ant trail of commuters, the city enacting its daily rhythms without consultation. "I told him you were complicated," I said, "that you had done things that hurt me and things that helped me, and that I was still in the process of understanding which column was larger." A pause. "That's honest. He's my brother. I don't have a dishonest register with him." I paused. "He told me to bring you to meet him. When he's stronger," he said. I stopped, because the memory of it carried a warmth that I wasn't sure I wanted Daniel to see me feeling. The warmth of a brother who had written 10 years of unsent letters and had therefore developed, in the absence of the ability to speak to me, a very precise understanding of what I needed. He said that a man worth keeping would come without being asked twice. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Daniel was very still beside me. Not the stillness of withdrawal, which I knew in my bones, but the stillness of someone receiving something carefully. "Tell me when," he said. 2 words. The same economy as no in that room in Sim Sha Sui, the same single syllable of intent. I was learning to hear him in units smaller than I had once thought meaningful, learning that for a man who had spent his life using language sparingly, 2 words could contain the weight of a paragraph. I nodded, not trusting myself to respond further. The cormorant spread its wings and dropped from the railing and was gone, out over the water, becoming a dark shape against the silver of the morning harbor and then becoming nothing at all. The divorce appointment was at 11. A law firm in Admiralty, 40 floors above the city, with views that made the harbor look small and the towers look like a child's careful arrangement of blocks. I had been to this office twice before, once to file, once to review, and both times I had sat in the clean, neutral waiting room and felt the particular atmosphere of a place designed to process the endings of things with minimum friction. I arrived at 10:50. Alone. We had agreed weeks ago that we would come separately. That the final formality would be conducted with the quiet dignity of two adults who had made decisions and were honoring them without theater. The paralegal brought me water. I sat in the chair with the harbor visible through the window behind the desk, and I thought about the woman who had sat at a different table 3 months ago and signed her name with a steadiness that surprised her, leaving candles burning in an apartment that was already finished. I thought about who I had been then, who I was now. The distance between those two people was not measured in months. It was measured in the specific accumulation of moments in which I had chosen, again and again and again, to stay present in my own life, to keep making the mark on the page rather than holding the pencil for 11 minutes, to send the portfolio rather than letting the overnight doubt fold it back into a drawer, to walk into rooms and take up the space that was mine without apologizing for the taking. 3 months. A lifetime. Daniel arrived at 10:58. He sat across from me in the waiting room, 2 chairs apart, the neutral distance of the professional setting, and for a moment we simply looked at each other in the way of people who have run out of positions to take and are left with nothing but the truth of the situation. He looked tired. Not the managed tiredness of a man who controls his appearance even in fatigue, but genuinely, humanly tired. The shadows under his eyes deeper than usual, his posture carrying something that was not quite his customary precision. He had been working late. He had been, I suspected, not sleeping well. These were things I would once have catalogued as data points in the project of managing his comfort. Now I noticed them as information about a person, a specific, complicated, imperfect person, and felt something that was simply concern, without obligation attached. "You're here," he said. "I said I would be." "I know." He looked at the window. The harbor, from this height, miniature and perfect. "I want to say something before we go in." I waited. "I'm not going to ask you to stop this," he said. "I want to be clear about that first. What I'm about to say is not an attempt to change today's outcome." He paused, assembled the words with the care of someone who has been rehearsing and has decided, in the moment, to abandon the rehearsal and speak plainly instead. "I want you to know that I understand what I had. I understand what I did with it. I understand that understanding it now, at this particular juncture, is a pause, almost worse than not understanding it. Because you can't use it. Because it comes too late to be anything other than a record." I looked at him. "But I wanted you to have the record," he said. "I wanted you to know that you were not invisible to me because you were invisible. You were invisible to me because I had spent my entire life perfecting the art of not seeing what I needed most, and you were—" He stopped. Something moved in his throat. "You were exactly that. Exactly what I needed most. And I looked through you the way I had trained myself to look through every important thing, because the alternative was admitting that I needed it. That I was—" the word arrived with difficulty— "dependent. On a person. On the warmth of a specific person in a specific apartment. On the particular way a room smells when someone who loves the details of living has been in it." The waiting room was very quiet. "I am not asking for anything," he said. "I am only giving you the record. So that you know, so that you carry forward, into whatever comes next for you, the knowledge that you were seen. Eventually. Imperfectly and too late, but genuinely. That every invisible thing you did was real and was felt and was—" he stopped— "was the best thing in my life, which I proceeded to end." Outside, 40 floors below, Hong Kong moved through its morning without us. The ferry crossing, the taxis turning, the whole vast ordinary miracle of a city full of people trying to find their way toward what matters. I looked at this man across 2 chairs of neutral distance and I felt the full weight of it, all of it simultaneously. The grief and the anger and the complicated tenderness and the hard-won clarity and the knowledge of what had been lost and the knowledge, quieter and newer, of what might still be possible. Felt it the way you feel things when you have stopped protecting yourself from feeling them, when you have become, through the specific education of your own survival, someone large. Enough to hold the whole of a complicated truth without needing to simplify it. "I know," I said. His eyes, which had been fixed on the middle distance, came to mine. "I know you saw me," I said. "Eventually. I know it was real." I paused. I needed to hear you say it. I didn't know I needed it until just now, but I did. So thank you. He nodded. A single movement, containing more than it appeared to. The paralegal opened the door. Mr. Ewan, Ms. Lim? They're ready for you. We stood. We walked through the door together, the last time we would walk anywhere together as husband and wife, through the quiet office and toward the desk where the final papers waited. I signed my name. Mara Lim. Not with the desperate steadiness of a woman escaping. With the calm, complete, unhurried certainty of a woman arriving. At herself, at the life she had rebuilt from nothing, at the open and unwritten morning waiting on the other side of this room. We walked out separately into the Admiralty afternoon. I did not look back. But I held what he had said, carried it forward with me into the city, into the harbor light, into the work and the brother and the becoming. Held it not as a wound and not as a consolation but as something rarer and more useful than either. The truth of having been known. Late. Imperfectly. But real. And I, Mara Lim, who had learned in the hardest possible school. That real was the only thing worth keeping. Kept it. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in early spring, I brought Han to meet him. Han shook his hand and looked at him for a long moment, with the direct, undiplomatic assessment of a man who has written 10 years of letters to his sister, and knows, therefore, exactly what she deserves. Then he nodded. Once. It was, I understood, the beginning of something. Not a restoration. Not a return. Something new, built carefully, on the cleared ground. Of everything that had been honestly lost. We were, all three of us, just beginning.